My name is Teiona Tarrant, and in this presentation, I'm looking at cultural equity in education, especially when it comes to students who are learning English. As I worked on my cultural autobiography, I realized how much our backgrounds and identities shape the way that we move through school, and that made me want to understand what English learners are experiencing. So today I'm going to share why I chose this topic, the research that I found, and of course, what I learned about how school can support students in a more meaningful and culturally aware way. Reflecting on my own cultural autobiography helped me see why equity and representation matter so much in the classroom. Project, I reflected on my own cultural autobiography. As a Black woman who learned to navigate different spaces and expectations, I became aware of how identity affects confidence, belonging, and how students show up in school. That personal experience is why I connect so strongly to this topic. In my original project proposal, I chose to focus on language, identity, and equity because I wanted to understand how teachers can better support multilingual learners. I was interested in how culture, communication, and confidence affect learning. In this presentation, I'll explain what led me to this topic, how it ties to my proposal, highlight the three sources I used, and share my biggest takeaways about supporting diverse students. My presentation by focusing on communication, because frankly, it's one of the most powerful parts of creating equity in any classroom or community. The way we talk, listen, and share ideas is deeply shaped by our background, our culture, and the experiences we bring with us. Growing up, I saw firsthand how people can misunderstand each other simply because they communicate differently or don't feel comfortable expressing themselves at all. For students, especially those from marginalized cultural or linguistic backgrounds, communication can either empower them or completely shut them out. That's why cultural equity is so important to me. I feel like it's not just about teaching content, it's about creating spaces where everyone feels heard, respected, and safe, using the language and communication styles that reflect who they are. When I think about my cultural autobiography, I also realize how much my identity influences the way that I understand equity and communication. My background is layered, my race is layered, my family values, the communities that I grew up in, and even the spaces where I never fully felt like I blended in. Those experiences shaped how I see people, especially those who don't always feel represented or understood. I grew up learning how to adjust, how to read the room, how to switch between different sides of myself depending on who I was around. And that really taught me early on what it feels like to not have your full identity welcomed. That's why my cultural equity means so much to me. My positionality comes from knowing what it's like to navigate multiple cultural expectations, and it makes me want to create environments, especially in education, where students don't have to shrink themselves just to feel accepted. Resource, I looked at an article from the American Federation of Teachers that talks about supporting students who are learning English, and it really opened up my eyes. What stood out to me the most is that supporting these students isn't only about teaching them language, it's about understanding their whole identity. A lot of the time, schools expect kids to fit into this box that already exists instead of adjusting the environment to meet them where they are. This article talks about how culture and communication play such a huge role in how students show up in class. Reading it made me realize how so many students feel like they have to shrink themselves just to keep up. That's why equity is shows up in the actual way we teach, not just in the programs or labels that we put. In that first article about supporting students who are learning English, I wanted to look more closely at what diversity looks like in the US classrooms. The data from the Pew Research that I found really stood out to me. especially the fact that roughly 25% of school age kids were actually born outside of the United States or have parents that were. That means classrooms are way more culturally and linguistically diverse than we might assume just by looking around. When I made the pie chart, it helped me to visualize the percentage of students who are navigating school while also navigating a new culture or even language. Seeing it this way kind of clears up that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's the reality of what teachers are walking into every single day. And to follow up on my second resource, I looked again at the Pew article that breaks down essentially the demographics of students in US schools. Of course, what surprised me the most was what we discussed previously about how high the 25% of students who come from some kind of multilingual or immigrant families are. That's a huge portion of our classrooms. The article also explained how different communities have completely different levels of diversity, which means teachers really need to understand their specific population instead of just assuming all classrooms will look the same. This data helped me see why equity has to start with actually knowing who's in the room with you and then knowing what experiences they bring with them. Actually, a children's book, The Name Jar. It's a book that I watched as a read aloud on YouTube, and I thought it was a really good reminder that something as simple as a story can support language development and cultural understanding. A lot of kids learn new vocabulary, tones, and communication styles from hearing stories out loud. But I also think the bigger message from this book is that it treats diversity with respect and it makes it feel almost normal. The characters, the families, and the situations show real kids in real classrooms. It reminded me that representation does matter and that using stories is an easy way to help students feel seen and build confidence, especially for those students who are still learning English or, again, navigating those new cultures. After looking at all the three resources together and compiling the information, I realized how connected language, identity, and equity really are. Students aren't just learning this content, they're navigating culture, community styles, as well as expectations of the classrooms. The more I understand who my students are and what they bring with them, the better I'll be able to support them. These articles and the children's book made me think about how important it is for teachers to not just include students, but to actually adapt the learning environment so everyone can learn confidently. Representation and communication matter so much, especially for multilingual students who are still figuring out how to participate in a new language or culture. It helped me realize how much teaching is about being intentional. I used to think that equity was mainly about making sure that everyone just had the same material, but now that I understand it more and that it's more about paying attention to what each student actually needs, something as simple as a story, a visual, or how a teacher explains a concept can completely change how students feel in the classroom. I also learned that culturally responsive teaching isn't a big dramatic change. It's small daily choices. It's checking my own assumptions, learning about my students' backgrounds, and using resources that reflect who they are. All three resources showed me that when students feel seen and represented, they participate more and they get more confident. That really opened my eyes to how connected all of the language, identity, and equity are in the classroom. Before this, I honestly didn't realize how much students bring with them from their cultures and from their communication styles. These things affect everything from how they participate to how confident they feel and even how they interact with teachers. The readings and the data really helped me to see that equity isn't just something extra that teachers do on the side. It's something that shows up every single day in these small ways. I also learned that culturally responsive classrooms really do start with understanding the students. We can teach them the information all we want, but if we're not understanding their backgrounds and their strengths and what they might need from us to be successful, they might not be. The visuals, the stories, and the research all helped me to see that students are navigating a lot more than just the assignments they're being given. For multilingual learners, school can be a totally different world. But to wrap everything up, this project really helped me to see how important it is for teachers just to be aware of the diverse learning settings in front of them. Each resource gave me a different angle, and the data showed me an even bigger picture. While the article explained the challenges multilingual students face, and the children's book reminded me of how powerful simple tools like stories can be, putting all those things together really helped me understand that equity isn't just an educational idea. It's something that teachers create every day with their choices. It's the way that we communicate, the materials that we use, the stories that we share, and the effort that we make to understand our students and their backgrounds. This project really showed me that when students feel understood and represented, the confidence building can be out of this world and it can make learning feel so much more accessible. But more than anything, it reminded me of why I want to be in education. I want to create a learning environment where students do feel seen and supported and valued just for who they are. Thank you for listening. I added a list of all my references, and at the bottom, there's a link where you can see the full 10 resources that I used.